And it's now 26 minutes to 10. Let's continue with news here on Africa World Hour. We spoke about the deteriorating situation in South Sudan. Let's come back to news on South Africa now. Its immigration debate is red hot. It has been for quite a while. But it's not just about policy and law or fear and scapegoating. It's about a lot more. The South African Federation of Trade Unions is also coming out swinging on this, defending the rights of all workers while calling out exploitation, Afrophobia and political opportunism. Today on Africa World Hour, we speak to SAFTU's Secretary General, Zwelinzima Vavi. We ask him the tough questions of why are we here and what ought we to do about it. Mr. Vavi, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to it.
Good evening, Tsepiso. Good evening to your colleagues and everybody watching your show.
So before we come to the issue of, because this is something that did come up at the National Convention that kicked off today, did SAFTU attend in any way, form or shape? Are they interested in it? Do they have any interest in this process continuing?
Well, we didn't attend, excuse me, we didn't attend and because we felt that with the 7 Legacy Foundation raising serious issues about the process, in particular expressing concerns about how government seemed to be wanting to position itself to lead this process that was meant to be a citizen led and inspired, we had felt that no, we must suspend our participation so that we can allow the people who have been the pioneers of this process to sort their differences out. Because if those issues are not resolved, we believed that the whole credibility of this process will be in jeopardy. So we didn't participate. We will participate once the issues the foundations are raising are resolved, and our participation will be a critical participation. It will be a participation where we express no hope that a dialogue will produce miracles for the working class, will address the structural crisis afflicting the majority of the population of this country, from unemployment that is breaking world records to inequalities that have made us the most unequal society in the world, to poverty afflicting 62% of the population, and a total collapse of our criminal justice system, our health care, our education, and our ability to provide services to the citizens of the world. And so we have no illusions that the dialogue will produce real results. More so because the record of the government in implementing recommendations of the previous commission leaves much to be desired. Tomorrow, we are commemorating the 30th anniversary of the massacre of the mine workers in the platinum belt in Marikana. There was a Falam commission that was appointed. Most of its recommendations are gathering dust. They have not been implemented. There have been many other commissions here. Not anyone can convince us that government have taken those seriously, including court decisions sometimes. So we will participate critically, and we will use that opportunity to say to the government, but we told you, you are driving our country to its knees. Look at the levels of unemployment, poverty, inequality, and corruption. We told you that these neoliberal programs you are importing elsewhere and implanting into totally different perspective and experience is not going to be working for South Africa with this massive underdevelopment challenges.
Okay, so let me blend from what the various issues that you've touched on, because they did come up at the convention and at the various plenary sessions. There were 10 of them. I was in one of them. The one that I was in particularly, I joined other delegates where we were looking at the state of the state. How can it be fixed, and looking at the constitution. So what we're seeing now, and you're touching on some of the issues that have come out, particularly when it comes to anti-foreigner sentiment, but as you've rightly said, a lot of it, in fact, it's Afrophobia. Nobody ever talks about foreign nationals from Western countries. But the question is, who is driving this anti-foreigner, anti-African immigrant sentiment, and why? It's not just now. We see it coming up over the years, every couple of years, and some will say it's because of the contestation of scarce resources. But I'd like to hear from SAFTU. What are you thinking? What are your thoughts, and what are you hearing from the shop floor?
Let's address two issues first, Tsepi. So the first one is that we are opposed generally to lawlessness, including the porous borders. We, like any other country, insist that we should maintain effective border controls and that we should accept that all countries at this moment are facing a challenge of legal and or even documented, undocumented workers moving from one country to the next country. Nobody can ever stop that. But there must be a serious effort by any government to make sure that there is effective border control. So we don't want to be misrepresented by these political opportunists to be wanting to say we are in favor of opening the borders of South Africa such that everybody who wants to come here can come willingly, undocumented. The second point that we want to raise is that we reject the exploitation of the migrant labor, in particular the undocumented workers. We have seen in South Africa farmers taking full advantage, restaurant bosses taking great advantage of exploiting the vulnerability of workers from our region and the rest of the continent, pitting them against other workers in the workplace, creating feelings of hatred, competition, and sometimes xenophobia. So yes, we accept that there is a challenge there. We are opposed to employers employing undocumented labor, and people must not misrepresent us. That's the second point we want to make. But at the same time, now going to the point that we are making, we are simply opposed to opportunists and which have no history of any kind of struggle against the systematic crisis that we are seeing playing itself out from the very same misgovernance as well as capitalism in South Africa, which wants to scapegoat all of the crisis South Africa is facing on migrants. It is not true, and we insist that if we were to remove all of these undocumented workers in South Africa, you would have solved the crisis of more than 12 billion people unemployed. It is not true that if we were to remove all of the migrants, you would have solved the crisis of dysfunctional education, criminal justice system, healthcare, and you name them all. We are scapegoating, or they are scapegoating, and they are shifting the blame away from the government that is failing the people of this country, away from the capitalism which by its nature reproduces the crisis of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. And instead of confronting the source of the problem, they go for the easy targets, the vulnerable, the desperate workers who are searching for opportunities all over, marching from one country as if they had a choice, they would walk all over in search of the opportunities, risking everything to go through the lions and all manner of dangerous animals in Kruger National Park from Mozambique, or crossing crocodiles infested Limpopo River to come here. Nobody does that out of choice. But even if that is so, it is not true that the source of crime, the drug epidemic that is taking over, that has become an epidemic facing our young people, is because there are some Nigerians in South Africa. No, every police report, including what General Mkhwanazi would have said recently, indicate that the mafias, the drug lords, bring these substances in South Africa with ships. They take them to Johannesburg, they corrupt the system, including corrupting the police, and they are able to feed our children and get them to use the drugs as part of them chasing the profits. And that's what we are facing. That's what every other country in the world is facing.
Let me just come to somebody raised a very interesting discussion in the group huddle that we had while having to delve into this issue of South Africa as a functioning state, or not, what the barriers are, what are the solutions, etc., etc. And this person raised the issue of what she says was a problem of a dishonesty, the cognitive dissonance that we are not being real with ourselves. And yet at the same time, we have an America that is now saying through the State Department that its relationship with South Africa is strained because of this discriminatory practice that it exercises. So you, as SAFTU, has called what is happening as selective prejudice. Would you then say that we are guilty in one way or another of what some may say a quiet racism that treats European or American migrants differently, which is obviously the converse of what the US government is seeing?
Well, generally, it's so there is a rise of right-wing politics in the world, centered around sometimes Orthodox Christianity that is fundamentalist in nature. There are evangelist groups that are emerging from America to Brazil and to Argentina, and South Africa will not be an exception to this rise of this right-wing extremism. And there is uniformity in terms of what is the agenda of these extremists, from Italy to other parts of Europe, America, South Africa included, and they always target the migrants as the source of the problem. They always target the most vulnerable groups, including people with different sexual orientation to them, as their targeted group. They always demand the return to the hanging of people, where they know that the main victims of people to be hanged are going to be the worst victims of slavery, colonialism, and apartheid. And they always like to scapegoat the crisis of capitalism away from its sources, which is the system that is creating this systematic crisis of underdevelopment, inequalities, and they want to shift that blame towards migrants. So that's the phenomenon we are dealing with. Luckily, in South Africa, if you look at these groups that are marching, the March for March, the Operation Tutula, these are not big groups in South Africa, unlike in Argentina and in Brazil, and certainly unlike in Italy, Germany, and even France is seeing a rise of that phenomenon. Yet there are small groups that are creating the havoc in the hospitals. So that's the first point. They thrive on misinformation, on lies, on propaganda, and as part of this shifting the game away from its sources. They will never march to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. They will not march against the bosses that are exploiting workers, whether these workers are from elsewhere or they are local. No, they always target the most vulnerable amongst the vulnerable in the country. And they lie to say the health crisis in South Africa is as a result of the fact that there are 15 million undocumented labor. No evidence whatsoever, but they keep on repeating that every day in the social media until the unsuspecting minds believe this propaganda that South Africa is being taken over and that one day we're going to be chased out of this country by these migrants. There are 15 million of them, and South African women are giving birth on the floor whilst migrants are on the beds, and they must be taken out of the system and all of that. Very emotional
And
propaganda.
Mr. Vavi, allow me to just jump in on that point, because I heard a statistic and I was sitting with a friend who is herself in the health sector. And a figure was quoted that something in the region of 70% of the people who are in public hospitals are foreign nationals. And I looked at it, I said, surely that figure cannot be right. And those types of details and data that is thrown out unchecked does have the potential of really lighting up a very explosive situation. So how do we balance this? On the one hand, you say, yes, let's keep the borders open, but have stronger controls. But then the critics who actually say the problem is the fact that the Constitution of South Africa is the one that says South Africa belongs to all who live in it. It lacks clarity on who ought to, enjoy those rights. What are your thoughts about it? And what are you saying as a labor union on how to deal with this? Because you will often hear the problem really is neoliberalism. So how do we deal with this capitalist society that is taking away from people that don't have?
Section 27, 1A of the South African Constitution is unambiguous. It says everyone has a right to have access to healthcare services, including reproductive healthcare. The National Health Act 61 of 2003 takes that further to say no one can be denied emergency medical care. Whether that person is a South African, is documented and undocumented, to force people from the beds when they are sick and vulnerable, to deny them the medical aid care is barbaric, is not South African, is inhuman, is not in line with Ubuntu that is made up of an African. It's un-African, and why? That's why we condemn this barbarism that is visiting these vigilante gangs that are all over now, intimidating patients and forcing them out of the queues and all of that. So that's where we're coming from. That's the first point that we're making. But that doesn't mean that we are saying, and let me repeat this, that South Africa must open its borders so that everybody must come here. There are cases, by the way, where we are told that some people from the neighboring countries are abusing the system, such as the reports that some ladies are able to move from clinic to clinic collecting medicines and going to sell it in some of the neighboring countries. And that's where the law must take its course. The law requires proper border management. The laws requires that there must be systems such that nobody can be able to go from clinic to clinic collecting medicines. The law must be effective against all of those who are breaking the various pieces of legislation in the country. And that's where we're coming from. But we are appealing to those who are tempted to take the laws into their hand that if you were to allow and encourage this lawlessness, then we will have arrived at the Banana Republic,
Okay.
at the at the law of the jungle, where only the fittest will survive.
Okay. I want to end with this thought: Pan-African worker unity beyond sloganeerism. What would it look like for South Africa with these socio-economic problems that are, as you say, polarizing?
The starting point is that Africa continues to be under attack from imperialism. And that imperialism have been taken into even greater heights with the coming into the White House by an ultra-right-wing conservative, Donald Trump, who has imposed a 30% tariffs against South Africa for political reasons, sabotaging the economy because South Africa is keeping friendship with countries that America hates, such as China, Russia, Iran, and or that South Africa have come in defense of the rights of the people of Palestine who are facing genocide from Israel supported by the United States of America. So we are now facing that 30%, and we've made a call that there must be even intense levels of cooperation, of trade between the African countries themselves, and they can only do that if they rebuild their economies, in particular, if they build their manufacturing sectors such that they build local industries, they build infrastructure that will facilitate trading amongst themselves and between Africa and the southern hemisphere countries from Latin America to Asia. If we do not do that, then we will not be embracing the spirit of Kwame Nkrumah, who is regarded as the father of Pan-Africanism in Africa, and that all of our heroes will be turning on their grave, in particular if we don't trade as African, but continue to rely on a new colonial power, the China, which extract and take all of the raw minerals from South Africa and make them finished products in China, only for them to come back to the African continent as finished products, and therefore creating jobs in China and creating dependency between Africa and China. We've got to change that. Pan-Africanism means that we must embrace each other as the Africans. We must support one another, where clearly some of our countries are lagging behind with no experience, no expertise, and no states that are functional. Okay. Must be able to use the Pan-African ideology to support and to ensure that everybody is brought to speed, so that we can trade amongst each other.
All right, thank you so much for that conversation. Zwelinzima Vavi, SAFTU's Secretary General, speaking to us about a very important issue. We've seen it growing, anti-African foreign worker sentiment. And he's saying we've got to rise beyond the populism and really look at immigration as an issue that is a mirror of the kind of society that we want to build, that is obviously not only pan-African in nature, but that ensures that all who need access to emergency healthcare, that has been the source of contention, that they be allowed to enjoy those constitutional right here in South Africa, as the law says. So let's end with news on what's happening on the SADC region. Madagascar's President André Rajoelina is set to take over from the outgoing SADC chair and Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa. The island nation is hosting the SADC Leaders Summit this weekend in Antananarivo under the theme Advancing Industrialization, Agricultural Transformation and Energy Transition for a Resilient SADC. South Africa is expected to be represented by President Cyril Ramaphosa, as the Dabatsotezi tells us.
SADC leader